Hello, good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, probably for some of you. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar in conjunction with Forrester about rethinking your cybersecurity stack. Super excited to see everyone here with us today. We had a last minute change with our speaker from Forrester, but the good news is that we have Joseph Blankenship with us today, who is the VP of Research in the security space. And he was very well versed in the nav space and a very active participant in the network analysis and visibility wave. So he's going to be here joining us today, joining Jeff Wheat, our Chief Technology Officer, as they have a conversation about things to consider and things to think about in your cybersecurity stack and as you reevaluate that stack. So a quick agenda just to give you a frame of reference about what we're going to be covering today and the topics that Jeff and Joseph are going to be covering during the call today. First, we're going to be talking about the drawbacks to the current cybersecurity stack, maybe things that we see and different elements of that stack, how we can improve those. And then we're talking a lot about the importance of the network in your cybersecurity stack, how that's just such a key component to your positioning of different tools and resources in that stack. And then we're going to be talking about Lumu. Jeff is going to be sharing a little bit about Lumu and how that's really important in cybersecurity operations. And then at the end of this webinar, we're going to have time for a Q&A with both Jeff and Joseph. So guys, please feel free to submit your questions either through the Q&A feature or in the chat. That's fine too, however you prefer. So I can have those questions ready for Jeff and Joseph at the end of the webinar here. So with that, I will introduce Jeff and Joseph, invite them to join me here and take it away.
Yeah, I'll start. I'm Jeff Wheat. I'm our CTO, but we want to thank Joseph for coming here today to start talking with these technologies about us. So to start off, look, some background. I used to run an incident response group, and every one of those had a firewall and an endpoint. Or most of them had endpoints, but the key thing is that the systems themselves aren't enough. The bad guys find a way through and stuff, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Is how some of that happens, as in addition to why and what we can do to deal with it. And we're going to get into some details on. If you want to go ahead and click forward there, Joseph, you have anything to add before I move into that?
Well, you used to run an incident response group. I used to be a in product for a couple of email security vendors, and we always used to brag, hey, we catch 95 or 99% of bad emails coming through, but the percentage that do make it into an inbox end up being the crucial piece of that, right? Not the ones you typically filter out. It's the ones that actually make it to the inbox that become problematic.
Okay. Yeah, look, it's not getting any easier. That I'll buy some time here while the slides moving forward. One of the things with AI, people worried about AI and its effects on the cyber side of it. And I said, well, the thing is, you're not AI. It still needs the human for the creativity. But what you're going to see is you're going to see a lot more unsophisticated actors using sophisticated tools. And that's been the biggest effect on AI. So it's really accelerated the curve in terms of, how we have to go out. There's just more bad actors out there using those advanced techniques. And, and here's some of the ones to the right. You can see why those things get through. Firewalls, as an incident responder, 10% of the attacks came in through an open port that someone left open. We call it, stupid human tricks, right? It's the same with the emails. It doesn't matter how good your email is, they're going to find a way to fool the human. You used to joke that all you have to do is say something about your paycheck not going in, and 99% click. It's those kind of things. So changing the philosophy. You still want to do that. I'm not talking about any of these. You still need a firewall. You still need an EDR. Just because you shut the door, they're going to go to the window doesn't mean you go back and open up the door, right? So you got to do those. We in security we call it the pyramid of pain. We're just our goal is to continually make it harder and harder and harder for the bad guy to get in. Doesn't mean they're never going to get in, but at least it's kind of like the old bear story, right? I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to outrun you. It's you constantly want to do that. Do not be the easy target. And as this goes on, it gets easier and easier and easier. And we can talk about some business, or Russian business networks, how they actually, and I'll give you one right now. As an incident responder, we had the Hafnium. And what happened was Microsoft put out, said, hey, we got to follow with our Exchange server, whatever. Well, in the time that they put that out to when people had patched it, the bad guys used it as an entry, and they mechanized it, right? And they went out and they basically put in a back door using that exploit that people couldn't get that, blocked quick enough. And I mean, we did like 75 instant responses in a matter of 45 days just on that alone. So that's an example of how they can mechanize that and move against you, with your patching and everything else. But it just those holes are going to continually be there. So we got to find a different way of doing things, without the silos. So any other further on that, Joseph, before we
getting into the kind of the advanced techniques, even some of the more advanced techniques don't involve any real technical breach attempts at all. They as you said before, Jeff, they're really going after the human being. One of the things I cover here at Forrester is insider risk. It's one of the things that interests me the most. And so you see external threat actors actually approaching the human and saying, hey, can we get your credentials? We'll pay you for those credentials. We'll blackmail you for those credentials. Or, we want access to these systems, or we want access to this data that you may have. And so it actually starts bypassing a lot of the perimeter controls and going straight to the human. And I think one of the things, as you consider this diagram that you've got up here, only one of these three things exists internal to the network, and that's the endpoint itself. You're not really seeing anything that is looking inward at the network. Everything's more focused on external activity.
Right, looking outward. It's
yep.
We start off back in, you and I've been around for a few minutes. It used to be the hard country outside. And then, eventually we started going towards layered defense because we had to, right? Because once they got through the outside, it was free for all. So that was the evolution of security, and that's where a lot of these additional systems, EDRs and whatever, came from. Now we're moving towards zero trust, right? And zero trust is a philosophy, right? It's just basically, I come from the DoD side of the house. We've been zero trust for a long time. We don't trust anyone. So it's trust but verify, right? Or don't trust and verify. So that's where the evolution is going because of these types of vulnerabilities. You can't assume they're going to be there. So some of the known vulnerabilities, of course, with firewalls, there's a number, weak passwords in old systems. How many times did we run into where they had the default password still on the firewalls? It's you just can't make this stuff up. It still happens. The one I point out the most with firewalls is those access control lists that are managed by a human start off as manageable, but over time they become unmanageable because you forget about what the earlier rules were, and you find yourself in a state where you just took your deny all and turned it into an allow all. In the coding world, we call that spaghetti code, right? Undocumented code that only one person can maintain, and that person left, right? It's kind of the same with the firewalls and the access control list. So that it gets so complex you can't see the trees for the forest. You can't see the hole in the systems you're doing. Any experiences along those lines, Joseph?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a couple of things that you said there, right, about the human, kind of the human piece of that. It's also the employee that you fired or left and you forgot to revoke their credentials. That becomes problematic. Or right before if I was an admin, right before I leave, I create a new admin account for myself, and now I'm able to remote in or create a back door for myself. Those become problematic. And also think about all the times that somebody came to you and said, hey, we've got to poke a hole in the firewall to enable this application to talk to something. And you, over time, you sort of lose visibility to that. Jeff, you kind of talked about the deny all list becomes a allow all. You also have those domains or those maybe third party accounts that you did do an allow all from just to accept traffic from them, and maybe that partnership ends, and that but the connection still exists.
Yeah, and think about it. In security, we've evolved so fast that like in coding, you had when you put code out to operational review, right? You stress test it. You did a number of things before you do it. We don't do that in security. We change a rule in a firewall and we fire and forget. And the problem is the operational test is either a pen test, which is a good thing, or the bad guy got in, and that's basically what a pen test is simulating the bad guy. So as an industry, it's not built in there for that incremental, almost waterfall type change. We've moved to, in coding, I'm going to keep referencing over in coding, but, it kind of parallels it. So, we've created those gaps, go fast, security and convenience goes like this, right? The more security you have, the less convenience and vice versa. So we tend to go towards convenience and the speed of execution and stuff like that. And that's creating those gaps. And I think we're having to pull back to a middle ground because of the risk, right? So EDRs, let's talk about some of the vulnerabilities within EDRs. EDRs are great, right? There's a couple things that the bad guys do to make that hard. The bad guys hide in the weeds, right? And how that looks in an EDR is they use legitimate processes for illegitimate reasons. And whenever I know, Joseph, with your background, my background, finding young people, the attitude and aptitude, who's going to be a good security person. I always look for people who tend to be A, curious, but B, think like the bad guy. Because if I were trying to do this, that's why pen testers are great that way, because people that are naturally gravitate towards pen testing are the ones that just like to break things, right? They like to break it and then fix it. So that's kind of the same thing. If I were a bad guy, how would I go about this? How would I attack this?
Yeah, Jeff, I
so,
think that's what kind of separates
right.
security people from a lot of other IT people or devs. Is they're always looking at how can I break this? I can't tell you how many times I've been in a meeting and like some security person will say, well, what if I do this to it? And the product manager, the engineer says, well, why would you do that? Because I want to see what happens. It is that kind of natural curiosity or trying to break it or figure out how do I take advantage of it.
Right. And with the EDR, they've got ways to, make the signature based stuff not work. It's either with the mechanized or whatever else, or just, by erasing it. One of the ones that's coming out now, they erase their tracks so the signature base doesn't catch it. It's just things like that. It's also PowerShells. PowerShells are a legitimate process, right? But I see it used a lot in the Hafnium was an example of someone that used a PowerShell. So when you see that a PowerShell is triggering, what an EDR is going to do, they don't want to overreact because they've already got a false positive problem with their behavior analysis. So what they're going to do is they're going to set that analysis at like a priority 3 or priority 4 because they don't want to overreact. Well, unfortunately, as a human, if you don't have a way of prioritizing, reprioritizing that, you're going to have a bunch of priority 3s, and it kind of becomes a random sample operation. All right, which 4 am I going to look at this morning? And they may go to nothing, they may go to something, right? So you need some way of going past that and reprioritizing that within the EDRs. It's just a weakness. I mean, it's inherent. It was strong at first, and then when the bad guys found the hole, then it became a weakness, right? So, and that's just going to be this time, I call it self-licking ice cream cone of this process that's going to go on, because essentially it's just going to keep going round and round and round. And what you got to do is narrow that area in which the enemy can operate from so that we can find, fix, and finish. So,
yeah, I think one of the other things you kind of hint at here too, Jeff, is the coverage question, right? Do you have EDR present on all your endpoints? And it's probably true of a lot of servers. It's probably true of your user endpoints, but maybe not your IoT devices.
Yeah, and exactly, and you roll right into the gaps, right? And that's even an even bigger gap. There's things you can't cover if you wanted to, if you had unlimited budget. But then there's also I call it engineering to budget. We'd like the budget to engineering. This is what you need to be safe. Well, you got $5, you got the $5 system, right? So we're all in that. No one has an unlimited budget, so you just have to. It's called risk management. Is what it's really called. But it leads right into what we're talking about. What are some of the gaps? And one of the gaps specifically with EDRs, you can't put an EDR on everything. You've got Internet of Things, SCADA, cameras, printers, phones now. Phones on your system are starting to be more of a target. So there's things that you can't put an EDR on. So you have to look at it through a different lens to figure out, okay, well, how do I know? How can I still look at this and discover, someone's using the gap at least, and be able to start to paint some of those shut. And what we have here are some of the different gaps or issues with these different levels of security and why people get through. So, for example, IoT, IoT is just underserved. think of it, that's a Raspberry Pi. The systems, think about how they were made. They were made to do a function, right? So for profitability standpoint, whatever, they have the processing power and whatever to do that function. Well, they may not have the processing power to do the security on top of the function. SCADA has been this way for a long time. And that's why SCADA is a big target now with the infrastructure, with the geopolitics that they're going after it. So it's an ongoing deal. So I've talked enough. You have anything to add on that, Joseph?
I think we covered some of these things before, but one thing I think you've got this firewall column here, Jeff. In the early days of zero trust, before we started having the ability to do things like microsegmentation, like a big part of the advice was, hey, let's segment our networks using firewalls. And a lot of the times that was like a next gen firewall. And I can remember some of my early conversations at Forrester having this conversation, and somebody stopping me and saying, by the way, how are we going to do that? How are we going to acquire all this equipment? How are we going to deploy it all? How are we going to manage it all? And what is the cost of doing that? I started kind of doing the math in my head and said, I just told these people to make a $7 million infrastructure change, right, to do this. Because fairly sizable network, and we're talking about where does important data reside and all that type of stuff. But let's just face it, we're not going to do a lot of those things, right? And so it starts becoming really incumbent on us to understand what's happening inside the network, because we know we can't stop all the traffic.
Yeah, I call that that's great, Miss America, but now what's the action plan for implementing world peace, right? It's kind of that old deal. So again, risk management, another analogy I give you got to block the face shots. Sometimes you're going to take the body shots, but just make sure you block the kill shots, right? So that's kind of the same with this. And that goes back to analyzing, what are the crown jewels in your environment? What's important, that business continuity, as incident responders, that was the main thing. A lot of times it was, stopping the ransomware wasn't the mess. It was recovering, to look at the hospitals, how long they're taking. I know ones that, family members of mine have worked at that were down on paper for 3 months. You hear the recent stuff they couldn't process stuff. I think it was United Health or whatever that was recent. All those things, it's the snarl afterwards. These bad actors go in there with a meat axe, right? And it's just a mess, and they don't care, right? That's not their problem. Their incentive is to make money. It's not for you to recover. So anyway, now one thing we didn't talk about was cloud environments. And I always, whenever there's a new technology, I always look at, what was the purpose, right? Clouds is, the purpose is initially was for it to be more cost efficient for you, because you might not be using a whole machine or whatever, and they optimize the use of that machine, but it's still the same machines you had. The group, the bigger deal was that they could have more sophisticated security because it was more broad based and more money involved. They could afford those expensive items that a smaller company couldn't, or school or city or whatever couldn't afford. And that's true. The problem is, you ran into it, is just because the security systems are there doesn't mean they're turned on or they're optimized for your environment. So that's always been a blind spot that we always ran into with the incident response. They might have cloud, but they didn't have certain things turned on. So and it's kind of behind the curtain. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. So it's, they're sophisticated systems, and if you weren't sophisticated in how to operate them, they may not have been implemented correctly. So that was another gap or whatever that it was fairly common out there. Not dissing on cloud, it's all good. It's just just don't assume. No one cares about your security like no one cares about your health more than you do, right? So it's just verify is kind of the point.
Definitely, yeah. I think at least early days, Jeff, people assumed that their cloud environment was secured, that the security was included. They found out a lot of them the hard way that wasn't the case, and then and other times, a lot of these security controls that are cloud native end up becoming cost prohibitive anyway.
Right.
So you have to, and again, I think you kind of mentioned this. You have to make some trade-offs, like where do we put our investments? Where do we put our bets?
Well, we have a term, where do we get the most juice for the squeeze, right? It's where are we gonna? I've got to do this. I've got to balance this and shift things around, and that's kind of the point. You don't get instrument lock on what you have and auger it into the ground, right? It's like don't be afraid to lift and shift, because what worked 4 years ago may not be working now, and it's a system. It's not a one for one. It's, it's like, yeah, how it worked. And, like that's the evolution of Lumu is, and we're going to talk about that is how we've come in to stitch all those environments together, those silos, right? Because in the past, vendors didn't work well with others. It's like it was, you had a series of silos. So the understanding of bringing that picture together, because it's a whole picture, the behavior across all those systems became the responsibility of the human, and the human's overrun. I mean, there's no way, it's like, one person on the wall isn't going to get it done, right? They're going to find a way through. So that's the point. So, and the ground truth of this is that all attacks come over the network. All attacks come over the network, and they got to come from somewhere, right? Minus insider threat, that's a whole nother webinar. But to the broader scale, every attack comes over the network, and all the phases of the kill chain are on the network, which leads to where we came to. One, Lumu focuses on where it came from and then gives you the visibility into the network. Like I said, there's the three unknown. There's what you know, there's what you don't know, and there's what you don't know that you don't know. This is the kind of visibility we're trying to give into that. And that's where we go to the next slide, which is, how we do this. And this is probably where we're going to spend most of our time is, these are the systems that are around. There's got to be something in the middle that pulls that into a human readable form, right? Going through firewall logs and stuff, you can do it, but it's mind numbing, and and the more sophisticated it is, the more hard it is to understand. The probability of mistake goes up, of missing something, and you only got to miss one thing to, that's the old problem, right? We have to be right 100% of the time. Bad guy only has to be right 1% of the time. So this is so talk about this a little bit, and how you see this, because I believe this is where we evolved to the whole concept of a nav anyway, and the need for it. So give me your thoughts on this, Joseph.
Yeah, absolutely, Jeff. And I think this kind of a simple diagram, encapsulates a lot of things. We talked a bit about all the stuff that connects to the network, and that's internally as well as externally, as you kind of see here. And the network becomes a great place to gain visibility over all of those things, all the assets that are talking to each other. What are the flows between those assets? Looking at how do the different assets on the network transact with each other, and what looks rogue, what's new, what's changed. Networks typically will have a kind of a a normal state, and then when we start moving away from the normal state, we hit what changed, right? What precipitated this change? And Jeff, you talked about doing the kind of the going and doing log examination to find everything, right? A very sophisticated attacker will turn logging off, or they will alter the logs. So we'll erase the tracks that they used to get there, right? And it becomes really difficult to go and do that investigation and figure out how in the world they got in the first place. A lot of this stuff either has very simplistic logging or no logging at all. You may make some hard choices as a security pro. And again, this is like where we figure out what is the right amount of logging to have. One of my most consistent inquiries here at Forrester from clients is, I spend a lot of money on logging. Getting this stuff, moving it to storage, indexing it, analyzing it, blah blah blah, and then storing it for a period of time. And so then we start making some trade-offs, like what logging do we decide not to accept because it's really cost prohibitive to do so, or it's not really useful for me. So how do we kind of get past that and get a really good understanding of what's going on inside the environment, the assets touching it, the risk level of those assets, any kind of unusual or unknown traffic, all of those kinds of things.
And well, and in my experience, to double down on that, what I saw a lot of log collection for collection's sake. I call it tick the box mentality. Look, I got a compliance box I got to tick. I got to store logs. So you're just throwing logs in there. As I always like going, what's the purpose of this log? What are you going to do with this? What threat vector are you looking to avert by controlling this log? Now, if you have a SIM, you can pull that in logically, or SIMs, they're hard to run too. I mean, it's not a fire and forget. That's a constant. The bad guy's always moving the cheese, right? So you've always got to move the algorithms to stay up with it. So can you do that? Can you maintain it? I mean, you got to look at this in terms of, okay, I could do it this week, but I'm not going to be able to do it the other 51 weeks, and will I have a life, or or will my blood pressure explode? It's like, what's going to happen? It's not getting easier on us. So having that understanding of and simplifying and rethinking the logic, I mean, that's part of where Lumu came from, is like, we use AI. We do, but we use it in a different way. We're not collecting packet capture and going down in the weeds there, because you know what, it's got to come from somewhere. If we can identify the somewhere easily, what that we call that a compromise. What we do is we look for anything in your network communicating back out, as a compromise, to a threat actor. Well, that one compromise could equate to 5, 10, 15, 20 behavior alerts on the back end. So, in essence, and I used to run Anheuser-Busch's Global SOC, I would place Lumu in a sophisticated network at the front end to take that out of the fight. Leave it down to when the people need to go in and actually need to look at user logs to get to that second level and stuff. But we're also giving you the visibility on, here's all the systems it went to while it was in there, right? So that's at machine speed. As an incident responder, we got paid $400 an hour to go find first contact and all contact. And we're giving it to you at machine speed, saying, hey, we do that whenever it comes up as new. This thing has been in your environment. No one knew it was there before. So here's all the thing it spoke to in the month or 2 weeks or whatever it's been in there. That's your immediate remediation list. And that's what I meant by, we're going to automatically block that attack, but then we're going to give you the detail in a very simplistic, you can kind of see on the screen there, the display, a very simplistic way of understanding the things that talked to, who was logged in, what the process was used, as well as additional threat intel on that threat actor. We have a saying in DoD, when your enemy tells you who they are, believe them, right? So, when we know who they are, these are the techniques, tactics, and protocols they use, and that's the hardest thing in the pyramid pain for them to be able to change. So I probably beat this to death. We probably need to move on to the next and let you talk about nav and how you got there, and what Forrester says about that, and I'll kind of sit back and listen.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, so we've kind of led this up to, hey, we've got to have really good visibility inside the network. And Jeff, I think you brought up earlier kind of the crunchy exterior. So even kind of going back, harkening back to the original days of zero trust. A former Forrester analyst who is well known as the person who coined zero trust, John Kindervag, his initial report was actually called No More Chewy Centers, and it was talking about that kind of crunchy exterior and the fact that hey, we can't have just kind of free reign inside of networks. We actually need to have controls inside of networks if we're going to contain threats. So that was sort of the genesis of zero trust. John also coined the term network analysis and visibility, because he saw the need to have a visibility inside of networks, and then B, to be able to do things about the maltraffic that we saw inside of the networks. And that's where he started the concept of network analysis and visibility back in 2011 with a report that was just amazingly titled "Pull Your Head Out of the Sand and Put It on a Swivel." And it was really about understanding what's going on in the network. And so now it ends up becoming sort of a combination of capabilities. You can see from this really long, wordy definition that I have tried to do a little bit of editing on over the years and pare down, but we're talking about a lot of different capabilities. We're doing traffic analysis, we're doing threat detection, we're using signature-based means, we're doing behavioral means. And when I got started in the space, everything was signature-based. Everything inside the network or any kind of detections we were doing were typically things like snort rules that we're firing. It was really, really noisy. And one of the things we had to figure out from all those rule sets is, how do we focus on the things that are critically important for us? The other thing that becomes really important with a nav tool is, and I think I mentioned it before, is asset discovery. We can't do zero trust. We can't really do really good security unless we understand the assets that are talking on our networks. That's one of the things that a nav tool helps us establish. What are all these things? In what language are they speaking in? How do they interact with each other? All of those kinds of things. Kind of looking at traffic flow and looking at things of relevance. And then when we do get detections, enabling the investigation. Let's just say we do have to do packet capture. Let's say we do have to do decryption to figure out exactly what happened. That's also where a nav tool has some of those capabilities as well to enable investigations and forensics.
Nicole, you want to go to the next one? I think we got some detailed diagrams in terms of, again, yeah, in this one, this was the original gaps we showed.
Yep.
Over to you on this one. It basically what we're saying is this, paints those gaps. No, that was the intent of the nav segment.
Absolutely. Yeah, you're actually looking inside the network, to look at how all of these things interact. That's, sort of the crux of what a nav tool does. And it is and this is, a little bit more security specific. It's not about network optimization. There are network performance monitoring tools out there, and they do a good job of monitoring network performance. But those are not security tools. Specifically, we're looking for the TTPs that an attacker is going to use. We're also looking at any kind of new devices or rogue devices that appear on the network that we need to go and understand. We're looking for traffic, Jeff, as you said, like CNC traffic that is communicating to known bad actors, and then we can shut that down, sort of really quickly and figure out how in the world did this get here in the first place. We're also looking at things like cloud environments. So we can't necessarily just say, hey, everything that's in the cloud is great, or we're going to ingest a ton of log traffic and try to, suss it out there. For setting up a network in a cloud environment, we actually need to have visibility into that environment as well, just like we would anything in our data center or premise-based network.
And then this is the classic, how do you know if it got through your firewall? This is what
Right.
this is. This is checking the checkers, right? This is that environment where you can sleep at night that, I've got something that lets me know when something got through the other perimeters, the other levels. So I think we can go to the next one if you want, Nicole. So, and you kind of covered this, I'll let you run with this and see if this generates any other discussion, but you kind of got ahead of us a little bit on that. So it's all good. So, we'll let you wrap this one up.
Yeah, Jeff, I have a bad habit of doing that. Just kind of talking at JB speed, I guess. But we kind of looked at we were working on a report called the Modern Definition of Nav, and we were thinking about, hey, what are all the sources of traffic that are really important, and then what are we going to do with all that stuff, and then what are the kind of the relevant outputs. So let's just say we do want to do automated response. Where do we need to have integrations so when we get a detection and we have a really high confidence level of that detection, we can really quickly go and take a response action to stop whatever the activity is. If we stop the activity, then we can come back and we can start doing the investigation, and then if needed, the forensics and recovery actions and so forth. But it's really about, hey, let's have really good data coming in. Let's examine that data. Let's have findings. Let's kind of look at what our confidence level is. If our confidence level is not above a threshold, maybe we send it to a human for investigation. If we have really high confidence, do we have an on-target detection? Then we automated a response, and that could be, hey, we're going to pop an alert in a SIM system, which is not necessarily response. It's just saying, hey, I found something. It could be a SOAR tool where we go off and we execute a playbook against whatever that finding is. It could be, hey, we think we got a piece of malware. Let's run that to a sandbox. It could be going straight to the firewall, shutting down the connection, blocking the IP address, alerting somebody, hey, we found a bad thing. Come over here and do something about it. It could even be an EDR integration where we have found something inside the network. We have found that it's affecting certain endpoints, and now we can push a detection to those endpoints or shut down a process where it's talking. It could be, hey, we just open a Jira ticket or a ServiceNow ticket and say, hey, guys, we have to go in and patch something. And then again, third-party APIs, maybe we're interacting with some sort of third-party system that you've got, to take some sort of an action.
Excellent. So it's like, yeah, I kind of keyed in on your SOAR automation on into the operational efficiency. It's about being automate what you can. Automate the block, stop the bleeding. Assess. It's like triage. It's like you're going to triage, and stop the bleeding, stop the wound, then to go heal the patient. But then it's also the follow-on processes of closing the ticket. All that operational flow that still takes time out of your day and being able to optimize that. So go ahead with this.
Yeah, I think early days of Nav, it was pretty simplistic in terms of, hey, we want to have visibility. And one of the things about visibility, right? So if you have visibility, we talk a lot about visibility. Visibility is really important. We want to know what's going on. We want to know what's talking. We want to know what's attached, and that's really important. That's sort of table stakes. So visibility is not enough. It's what do you do with that visibility, and that could be combining it with threat intelligence to help us realize, hey, what we've got here is a sophisticated actor that is, executing a campaign that we know through threat intel. It's doing detection of known malware or known CNC traffic. It's really looking at how do we deploy in different types of environments. We could have a fairly flat, very simple IT network. We could have a very complex IT network with all types of different systems attached, including things like, Jeff, I think you mentioned SCADA systems or some sort of OT, sensors, an IoT network. All of these things that I can't necessarily go and put an EDR tool on, but I need to be able to passively, examine the traffic coming from those systems to see if there's any changes or if there's any known, sort of maltraffic. And then,
Medical
lastly,
devices being
what we
another
just talked
example.
about, that response and orchestration.
Yeah, medical devices being another example.
Oh,
It's
medical
one of the
devices is a
reasons.
perfect example.
Yeah, healthcare has a lot of attack surfaces that the rest of the industry doesn't have. That's why they're a hard target or an easier target.
And those things are notoriously hard to patch too. So we, a lot of times we're running in a known vulnerable state because of the fact that we can't necessarily push a patch to to an MRI machine or something like that.
There you go.
All right, so I think it's kind of the point of the presentation here is rethinking the security stack. Jeff, you started your presentation with that kind of nice diagram of email security, firewalls, and EDR, right? So, all right, so that's sort of the core of what folks have, these days, at least sort of the starting blocks. If you think about really simplistic security, what are the three things that I need? That's probably a great place to start. If you really want to get to the next level, you really want to understand your network, what's talking on your network, you actually have to integrate something like a nav tool, because you really can't, and that first point is about visibility. Yes, you can't defend what you can't see. That's why it's really kind of key. I understand the assets that are talking on my network. I actually have visibility to all that stuff. The middle one is one that is really key for me. Cybersecurity is a space that seems to invent an acronym a minute. I think if we plotted a chart of malware creation and breaches, and on another chart acronym creation, acronym creation may actually exceed the growth of the attacker actions and so forth. So don't let the new acronym distract you. NAV has been around since 2011. We decided not to change it because we really what this is all about is analyzing traffic, which is a key domain of zero trust, right? Having good analytics of what's going on inside your network. You really can't do zero trust without that analysis and without that visibility, and then being able to do a really good job of detection and response. That last piece about prioritizing analyst and user experience, Jeff, you talked many times about kind of the human quotient of this. Humans are still using these tools, as of right now, until somebody invents the autonomous SOC that we keep hearing all about. That's one of those shiny acronym things, right? So a couple of my Forrester colleagues, Ali Mellon and Jeff Pollard, did an awesome report a couple of years ago, and it was about analyst experience. And it was kind of focused on, we have to give our people a really good and easy analyst experience, because if we kind of overcomplicate things, that complication is going to not only make us less efficient, it's going to make us miss things. So you have to create a really robust, and when I say analyst experience, I'm not just talking about the UI. The UI can be beautiful. They can make really shiny, all kinds of graphs and all kinds of whiz-bang stuff, but it may not be usable, right? We actually need to be able to go and execute our jobs, and that's what analyst experience is all about.
That's why I have a term for that called marketecture. It plays well,
Absolutely,
but
right?
get the job done. I do want to say something about the shiny objects and the EDRs. Look, think as security individuals or whatever, we've got to manage up, right? To get the funding, whatever. And the three-letter acronym world is confusing for us to stay up with. Imagine what it's like to the people up above, right? So we've got to start to communicate things in terms of the business language. What impact does this have on the business? I used to, with the instant response, we did a lot with manufacturing, and of course that's kind of one of those environments where they'll drop 2 million on a brand new press, but we'll have trouble with 5 grand for something they don't understand, right? So I used to ask him. I said, look, how long can you be down? What does a day, a week, a month, cost your company environment? I'm usually talking to the CFO, and well, you see him thinking about it. I said, okay, how long before your customers go find other suppliers? And then you let them kind of gravitate on that for a little bit, and then it's like, how many years did it take you to get those customers? Okay, now let's talk about this whatever, this nav system that I want to put in there to give you the visibility to tell you when you're being attacked, or and automate your systems and stuff. So it's key that you be able to do that, but as vendors, we've got to give the users the ability to the content, the report creation in a form that is readable at that level. And I'm going to go into that with Lumo a bit, and that's one of the things we do. We ought to generate those reports that do not only protect that investment in Lumo, but also in all the systems within it, because we've been the security person that shows up with a 3-letter acronym and asks for money, for years. And that system, the individuals at the top have no idea whether that's working. Well, that's having Lumo in the center of this environment is key, because now not only are we identifying the attacks automatically and blocking them at line speed in milliseconds, what we're also doing, we're doing it with the systems that you have installed. It's multiple integrations. It's playing well with others. It's like, we have over 90, we may have over 100 by now. We're growing them so fast. So it's about being that ubiquitous centerpiece to that environment to protect, so that you do know when things get past the firewall, but then you improve the firewall. It's not we're just another stopgap. We're a symbiotic system of sitting in there and not only stopping those attacks, but improving the systems around us. Now, what we're doing is we're working with the APIs within those systems, so using their techniques, tactics, protocols for protecting that system and using that to defend it. A lot of, like, firewalls, for example, use this like a local threat intelligence source almost. That's how they treat us. We're doing it dynamically. So when we identify a new threat actor through their behaviors and whatever else that's never been seen before, it might be on your network, John, or Joseph, sorry, it might be on your network, but then automatically everyone else with Lumo is now protected from that. Right, it goes into our what we call our illumination process. It immediately becomes a list of the known IOCs, not the ones that we're processing and trying to figure out. That's how we stay ahead and improve these. We also, with the endpoints, we're passing on, hey, if it gets past this firewall, this is what this threat actor is known for, and this is what they're trying to install on you. So that becomes, we're constantly updating the endpoint protections and using the systems they use to block. Email security, we're a little bit different with email security. We're not blocking email. Right? No, they don't want to get in the middle of that. What we're doing is we're blocking the intent of the email. So we're looking in those emails for those same locations, those domains, those IP addresses, the places they're trying to get you to go to compromise you. And what we do is we keep track of that. We don't keep your email. We keep track of the fact of the links and the bad deals in the email, so that when someone does click on that, it's automatically blocked. But then we cross correlate that. A lot of people just block email and it goes in. Well, as an analyst, that doesn't tell you the nature of how they're trying to attack you, right? So what we're doing in that case is we're not only blocking, we got rid of the threat, but we're giving you the analysis. Like, here were the emails they used to try and penetrate you. Here were the email addresses they tried to use. And then maybe you can take different inferences from it. If it started on my email and then went to yours and several others, okay, I got a business email compromise. If a bunch of them came in, they probably scraped it off the dark web. If I look at that threat actor and they have multiple types of email attempts at you, that's intent. That threat actor is really trying to get into you, and they're using different tools in the bag to try and do it. It's not just I threw out this spam out there and see who clicks. Now I'm targeting you. And so that's more insight that a lot of other systems, like I said, we work with the email blocking systems. We tell them, hey, here's what's going on. The same way we do with the firewall and the endpoint. So it's that thought pattern of stitching that all together. I call it, I use the analogy of a chain. Instead of a bunch of fence posts, now I got this mesh of fence to catch everything because we're blocking the gaps. And the way we collect things, we also see the Internet of Things and whatever because we're looking at the network communications. That's why the network is key. When we're on there, we can see that communication with your camera, with your phone, with your email, because we're collecting with a virtual machine at the enterprise level. We have APIs at the cloud, and we do have agents for the remote workforce. It's not required, but for that remote work. So we're covering all those attack vectors and bringing that into one level and say it's about painting all the gaps shut. So that's the key of what we're doing. I know we're getting close on time. I do want to leave some time for questions. We do have a Lumu free account. I say, go download this. It's the same one that you run with us. The only difference is, some of the context and automation stuff is there. We gotta make a living, but take this out and drive it like you stole it. This is going to tell you what's getting through your firewall. And I highly recommend you download that and take a spin with it. I mean, look, our monikers are we're easy to install, easy to operate, and easy on the checkbook, right? It's like schools and cities and whatever can afford us. We've scoped ourselves to be able to help the environment and possibly free up money for other things, for all those other things you're having to do from your controls that are being pushed at you from every which direction. Multi-factor authentication, zero trust, all those kind of things, freeing up that budget. So that's where we're doing very well for our customers in that space. So go ahead, Nikki. I'm done.
No, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Joseph. Great insights in the nav space. Yeah, we're going to open up this time for Q&A. Please remember, we have a couple of questions here, but for those who haven't submitted their questions yet, guys, please feel free to add them into the chat or in the Q&A feature. I'm going to pull back our free account slide so you can go ahead and see that in case you missed it. But yeah, no, for today's Q&A session, I think we can start. The first question was for Joseph. Joseph, how do you see AI changing or evolving nav tools in the future?
I'm glad we mentioned AI because we don't mention AI at least once, we can't have a proper cybersecurity presentation. So Jeff mentioned it, Nikki, now you mentioned it, now I mentioned it. So at least we're checking compliance checkbox done. One of the things that has been really interesting for me, I mentioned, Jeff, you said this at the top, you and I may have been around for a bit in terms of cybersecurity, and I kind of mentioned it during my talk track. The early days, this was all very much about signatures, which basically meant that we had to see something, we had to understand what it did, then we would write a signature to identify it, and then we would deploy the signature. And what the threat actor would do is they would kind of move on, say, I won't do it that way anymore, I'll do it another way. And then we'd have to go write another signature or amend the first one. I think one of the things on the defender side that AI allows us to do is understand the intent of a piece of malware or a piece of traffic that's coming in, and then be able to take an informed action automatically based on that. And that will free up our defenders a lot to kind of work on the things that either we don't understand, the AI doesn't understand, we don't already have a playbook for. We can really concentrate on the things that are mysterious to us and potentially really harmful. On the defender side, a lot of it's still fairly academic. The sad situation so far is that defenders have not seen the need to go deploy all of these ultra sophisticated AI techniques because the old stuff still works. The old ways of doing malware still work. The old way of social engineering still works. Phishing still works. All of that stuff still works. So there's no need to go and start figuring out what's going to be next level. What I do expect to end up happening though is as we continue, and by the way, we're getting better every year at defense. But as we continue to get better at defense, the attacker will ramp up what they're doing. They'll open up a new toolbox. And what we'll end up seeing, I believe, is probably much more automated types of attacks. But in terms of phishing and social engineering, we'll see much better worded attacks that'll be very targeted toward an individual and not a group of individuals. Being able to bring in a bunch of information about me and the stuff that I do, you'll end up seeing stuff like deep fake attacks. Where somebody is imitating Jeff's voice and calling me and saying, send me like 200 gift cards. I'm stuck in Tulsa, please help me. Something like that. So we're going to kind of continue to see this sort of the arms race that has been in cybersecurity forever. It'll just be sort of enabled by AI.
Yeah, it's mentioned. Funny you mentioned the deep fake. I was on a panel where they talked about, does AI scare you? I said the deep fake scares me.
Totally. Yep.
It's we're in a kind of an environment of guilty until proven innocent. Good luck. But with the AI, I use the analogy. It's like, if you're trying to keep up with a Ferrari, you better have a Ferrari, and that's what you are. I mentioned the Hafnium deal. That's an example of them mechanizing something and rapidly deploying it and exploiting it, and then coming back in a business process and working off the most profitable ones. That's exactly what they did. That's the Russian business networks, and it's an environment, and and then they pass it down the lower to do it. So yeah, your systems going forward are going to have AI. Either they're going to have and used well, right? Obviously, but you're not going to keep up if you don't, and if you don't have something deployed that's using that technology to stay at least close.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. All right, I'm going to move to the next question. Simple. Is there going to be a recording of this session available? Yes, there will be. We'll send it to all those who attended and those who had registered. If not, there will be a recording on our resources page as well. Can Lulu see activity from IoT devices?
The answer is yes. I mentioned we collect with a virtual machine at the enterprise level. What we're seeing is all your DNS and syslog traffic. So, if they're communicating with that internet of that IoT device, we're going to see that interconnection. We're going to see where it's coming from and block that. And then we're going to see, kind of what it looks like too. If it's not one that's previously known, then we'll do what we call a deep correlation to go back and determine if, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck, right? It's like, so we're going in and using that to do, this is the bad guy, this bad guy, but they've moved up here. And what that, as a holistic way of looking at it, what we're doing is taking away the business fund. We're attacking their business case. It's like we're always making them move. Yeah, and when they move, it costs them money. It's like it's making it harder for them and stuff. So that's really the concept. But yes, yeah, that's how we see it. That's how we see the cameras, all of that.
All right, thank you. Another question for Joseph. Does Forrester have predictions about the future of network-based attacks? I think you touched on this a little bit with the deepfakes. Joseph, anything else that you have to add there?
Yeah, we kind of just getting into predictions in general. We do a predictions report every single year where we kind of look at what we believe is going to happen the next year, and then we'll do a follow-up blog the following year to see how we did. We'll grade ourselves. So hopefully, no one's grading me here on this one. In terms of network-based attacks, I think probably the thing that we are going to continue to see, for the most part, is most of these will be, and Jeff, you alluded to this before, right? It will have a human in the loop someplace. It'll be a successful phishing attempt, or it'll be a human who accidentally, mishandles a policy or leaves something open. That's typically, the vast majority of breaches that we'll see. So I totally believe that we'll absolutely see that continue, and I do believe we will also continue to see people leveraging open source and third-party tools as a way to gain entry. That's one of the things we've really got to do a better job of, is understanding where our software comes from, and then examining that software for any vulnerabilities, and then moving quickly to be able to patch that. One of the things I think I've been really encouraged to see is a bunch of, and by the way, our security tools are not always the most secure things either. If you follow that news at all, you've actually got to watch your security tools as well, not just your IT software. I've been really encouraged, to see so many software vendors though kind of jump on CISA's push to do, to build security into code. This, I can't believe it took until 2024 for anybody to come up with such a thing, and not just make it, hey, we'll just do it case by case or company by company, instead of having a really collective effort to get better at writing software.
Yeah, a lot of that's based in the agile development, but we could spend a whole nother webinar talking about that.
Totally. So we got 2 more webinars coming up, right, Jeff? We got one on insider threat, and we got one on
between waterfall and agile. Yeah,
and agile coding. Yeah. Love it.
All right, guys, I have like three more questions here. Yeah. Another one for you, Joseph. NAV sounds a lot like NDR. What is the main difference between the two?
Yeah, when we first came up with Nav, we didn't really have a thing such as automated response. And there's one of the reasons we said, hey, we're going to analyze traffic, we're going to gain visibility to traffic, and then we're going to let people figure out how they're going to do response. Over time, we've enabled a lot of automated response capabilities. One of the reasons we decided to stick with network analysis and visibility, or NAV, is by definition, this is a passive technology, right? One of the things, and Jeff, you talked about medical devices. One of the things you don't really want to do with medical devices is sit something in the middle and stop traffic. I've been around for a bit, and we used to have a thing called a IPS. If you pushed a bad IPS rule, guess what would happen? You would stop traffic, and then bad things would ensue. So it was one of the reasons people never ran those things in blocking mode. So we never really embraced the NDR acronym because we want to demonstrate these things are passive in nature, and with automation, they were going to interact with third-party tools like a firewall, an EDR, or maybe a SWIG or a CASB or whatever it is. Whatever shiny new acronym you come up with, it'll interact with it and it'll take the action there with something that's actually in the network path.
And you just identified a lot of the downsides of the bump on the wire, right? Now you're the single point of failure, right? So, and we don't do that. We don't have that. We're collecting the DNS logs and sys logs, so we don't create that single
Absolutely.
point of failure, that bump.
Okay, I have two questions for Jeff. How is Lumu different than a SIEM?
Okay, so a SIM, what a SIM does is a SIM collects a number of different logs, and it takes that and it looks for cross correlate, intersections and joins is what we call it in the data science world. It's looking for things that are adding up, kind of pushing a spike out that this might be an event, right? In and of itself, it doesn't have the orchestration, right, and automation. That's why when you had Splunk, you usually had something like Phantom called, that did that. Now Splunk bought Phantom, so they have it, but it's complex and goes across the deal. So the difference between us and them is we're automating based on the location of the threat actor and some of the behavior. Now there's crossovers with all this, right? We've had customers that have replaced their SIMs with Lumu. And what they did was, well, what we don't do is we don't provide that database query back into that data to look good. All right, was Joseph online on Friday at midnight, blah blah blah. Those kind of things to go that deeper, the human analysis down into the logs. We don't provide that. So the way some have used Lumu to replace that is we give you a lot. We do the automated block, which SIM doesn't do, but then we automate the threat hunting process by giving you the information need to go do remediation further on what was contacted by that. But what we don't do is give you that deep log, analysis, down into the human analysis of it. So what they do is they go out and they store those logs that they would do that with in a much less expensive version of a SIM and put something like an Elasticsearch or SQL. There's something to help them facilitate searching those logs. So I hope that kind of helps. That was a really quick answer because I know we're running out of time. But the difference is, there's overlap, but a SIM was meant to be a log aggregate. That's why they're big and have big, data space to do that. And then where the real science comes in is they're able to do it very quickly. Like an IBM Watson, QRadar, some of those things, they're able to get that answer for you really quickly. And that's the science of how they store the data and how they categorize it and how they're able to search it.
Perfect. And just one last question there. What tools does Lumu integrate with? I'm thinking this is like a response.
The shorter list, which ones don't we?
Yeah.
To be honest, I mean, we're approaching 100 different integrations. If you've heard of it, we probably way ahead of you and integrated with it. Obviously all the big ones. We integrate with firewalls, EDRs. Microsoft Defender is another one. We integrate with SIMs. The context of the data we give you, we store in 6TAXII, which is a standardized format that the SIM could use. So we integrate with the SIM, we can pass to the SIM. So we sit in the whole security environment, whether it's a small environment like a school or a small city, all the way up to an enterprise customer. We fit in the environment and stitch it together. So the short answer is, it could be shorter to list something that we don't, and if we don't, we probably are. If our customers are starting to use it, we watch the gravity and respond to that. And we put our integrations in because we're working with the APIs on the systems. And what's really sexy about that is if they change revs or whatever, there's no break fix. We're using their API, so it just continues to work.
Okay, well, Jeff, Joseph, thank you guys so much for your time today and for helping us out with the webinar.